So Karamoja is home of the Karamojong. They're the people group there. They're predominantly historically pastoralists, but there's a long history of crop failure from droughts and diseases and irregular rains, livestock, and conflict, and they've been neglected by central government. If you know anything about Uganda, you know about the LRA, insurgency in northern Uganda. And for a long time that was the focus or the highlight of Uganda, of LRA-affected areas. The Karamojong were not affected by the LRA because they fought and beat the LRA when the LRA tried to come into Karamoja. So that gives you a hint of how difficult the people are there, where the LRA didn't even want to go and touch them. But it's great because now there's not that history of conflict with the LRA. I say neglected by central government because the central government views the pastoralists, and so they're viewed as primitive, simple, old, wild people. If you're in Uganda and you ask people what's Karamoja like, they say, oh, those people are crazy. They run around naked with guns. That's the stereotype of the Karamoja. To some extent it's true. They are naked, they do have guns, but they're good people, they're just pastoralists. But central government, not a fan of pastoralism. So Karamoja today, it has a bad history, but it's kind of, things are happening in a positive way now. It's at a good time for development. Things have come into order so that it's a lot easier to develop. There's a big shift from pastoralism to agro-pastoralism. People are abandoning the cow for a variety of reasons. They're losing all of their cows to raids. Cattle raiding blows my mind. It doesn't make any sense for me. But we know that cows are the symbolism of wealth, so everyone tries to take each other's cows. In the meantime, they're shooting and killing lots of people, and it's lots of insecurity. The government of Uganda did a great disarmament program, minus a few human rights violations, but the end result was there's now less guns in Karamoja. You say, how were guns there in the first place? When Amin lost power, the soldiers basically just left, and the Karamoja walked into army barracks and helped themselves to the ammunition and guns. There's also a lot of cross-border arms trades through South Sudan and through Kenya. Kenya has tons of guns, and they don't regulate it very much. So, lots of insecurity, lots of conflict, just with cattle. But now things are changing. The guns are gone, more or less. At least people are hiding them a lot more. In the past, you would just see warriors walking along the road with their AK on their back, just 6, 7, 8 of them. But now you don't see that anymore because they'll go after those people. So now that there's security, there can become, it's a positive environment for development. There's a lot more support for agriculture now, with money and donors and Uganda as a country looking to revamp their agriculture production. So that's bringing in a lot more influence of agriculture. So this is, I was in a village like 2 weeks ago, and I found this old Muse, an elder. And he's one of our beneficiaries in our program. And you see all the beads, all the bracelets. And in Karamoja, it's a sign of their wealth. This guy used to have hundreds of cows, but now he doesn't have any. And so he just sits under the shade of his tree in his manana. But you kind of see the stark contrast where now there's corn, and he used to have a bunch of cows, but they're just not there anymore. It clearly kind of visualizes that big shift from pastoralism to agro-pastoralism. Here's just a picture that paints a bit more. These are manyadas. This is where the people live inside of. It's taken from a plane. You can see the rings of defense, kind of an outer fence, then the inner fences. In the middle would be where they would keep all the animals. It kind of symbolizes the value they used to have for the animal. They put it in the center of the village. They can protect it. There's multiple layers protecting the animals. But in the manada I was visiting last couple weeks ago, all of this was now a garden because it's so fertile from the manure of the animals.
Right.
There's no animals to put in there anymore, so now they're growing sorghum and maize and beans. But that again symbolizes that big shift where they used to put all their animals, now they're planting. This is the LC1 of the village, and this is that inner circle of the manada. LC1 is like the local village political leader. But you can see he's growing maize in his area. So Karamoja, a lot better now. Increased security, now things are okay. There's pretty good rains. There's increased attention to education, and there's a lot of money coming in. In the past, all the money was going to LRA and refugees and resettlement, but now it's shifting into Karamoja. This is our sign just as we come into our town. It just kind of symbolizes return the gun, embrace education, summarizing the shift away from pastoralism and conflict. But kind of as good as things are now in Karamoja, it has that history continues to play a role in today's development. There is a long history of food aid, over 40 years, of people just getting free food from the World Food Program for those various reasons: conflict, poor rains, drought, disease of animals. Whatever the reasons are, people have been getting free food for 40 years. If you got free food for 40 years, you'd become dependent on it as well. So there's a big mindset problem we're having in working with the people and communities and getting them to understand the need to embrace agriculture rather than just handouts. So in the past, food was distributed through local government. I say distributed because the food never really reached the right people. It's a big corrupt practice. Local government officials would hire warriors to kind of shoot at food distribution points so that everyone goes crazy and just grabs the food and runs out. And the reason they would do this is because then you can't account for the food to say where did the food go, how much was distributed, because they would all just distribute it to their own personal houses. And then whatever was left, the people could kind of fight for. So in 2009, there was a big famine, just as it kind of always seems to happen in East Africa. Like last year, like the Sahel right now, kind of happens. So the local government was out, and then INGOs came in, Samaritan's Purse came in. For Southern Karamoja and World Vision, it took North Karamoja, and we were doing the food distributions for those areas. We were distributing to over 1 million people at the time, and then there was a household assessment to kind of say who's the most vulnerable, how much food should they get. It was a very big disaster relief response. And people were getting beans, maize, oil, salt, kind of a partial food basket, we thought. So now that's the history, 2009. 2010 comes along, WFP says we can't just keep feeding all these people, and we don't have the money or the resources. So we had to shift into kind of a food for work program. Looking at recovery, getting away from relief and into more rehabilitation. So then they introduced KPAP, Karamoja Productive Access Program. That was my field semester, which was great with Samaritan's Purse. They came in as an intern, and they said, oh, we just got this pilot for 3 months. Can you manage it? I said, I will do my best. And so I ran this pilot program, and it was introducing the idea to these people that you have to work for food now. So able-bodied people were taken from this food list, the free food, general food distribution, and put onto this conditional transfer list. So now people had to work 13 days over 6 weeks so that they can get a food ration. NGO partners were selected to build productive assets with communities. Productive assets are things of value to the community, things like community gardens or roads or water catchments. You can read. This picture is it's a surface dam, we call them choco dams, but it's just labor-based. You just dig, and then the water, kind of rainwater runoff comes in. It's great for the animals, and great for kind of small gardens around the area. So we would kind of work with communities to build these assets. 2011 came, and then we introduced NewSAF 2. NewSAF 2 is the current program that I worked on. I'm trying to go fast so we can ask questions. So it stands for Northern Uganda Social Action Fund. It's in all of northern Uganda. NewSAF 1 was in response to the LRA, saying they blew up all our bridges, they blew up all our schools. Northern Uganda was significantly far worse than the rest of Uganda. So the government got a big World Bank loan, and we're trying to rebuild the northern Uganda infrastructure, roads, schools, teachers' houses. It had pretty good success. It was wildly corrupt, and lots of question marks about where things went. But largely speaking, it did good things. So Uganda said, let's do a second USAF, a second Northern Uganda Social Action Fund, because Northern Uganda is still a bit slow, struggling, and focusing on Karamoja. WFP have a huge history in Karamoja. In a sense, they created a mess. So they said we need to kind of sort our mess out. So they are part of NUSAF too, but they have their own money from DFID and food supporting countries. So it's a 3-year program, and it's like $23 million a year. A lot of that cost is just for the food, because you're trying to feed 77,000 people. So a lot of it's food, but that comes from the US, from our grain banks, from Spain, Japan. Certain countries give a lot of money to WFP in Uganda. So it's a government program. I work on a Uganda government program, but it comes through the World Food Program. Kind of it's just more formalities. The purpose of NUSAF 2 is all about resilience. If you do anything with food security, you're going to hear this word resilience. It's a big kind of buzzword right now. And that's just looking at, we keep having these famines. Why do we keep having these famines? People can't cope with these things. We need to make them stronger when things go bad, make them more resilient. So that's what we're working on now. This is our calendar of events in Uganda. This is Karamoja, this is the rest of Uganda. Karamoja is unimodal, so it only gets one rainy season. The rest get 2 rainy seasons. That's also one of the reasons why there's such a long history of famine and drought, is because if you get one bad rainy season, you're done for the rest of the year. You don't have a second chance. So we're looking at reducing asset stripping during the lean season by providing budgetary support through food aid and cash transfers. An example of this would be, we're here, where are we now? This is Karamoja. It's raining in June. So people just planted around April or May. But you look at the history of where they came from, it stops raining in October. It comes all the way through, there's a dry season. Things get bad. It's dry, it's windy, it looks like a desert. And people are just using what they harvested kind of to survive over the years, over the months. So then now people have eaten all their food, they planted for next year's food, but they're waiting for it to harvest. So this is called the lean season, because they run out of food there. They're waiting for their next food harvest. So we're trying to prevent asset stripping. An example of this would be now, there's no food. The food's coming in 3 months. What do we do to survive for the next 3 months? So they sell their animals, if they have any. They go to the mountain and cut down all the trees and burn firewood, which causes all kinds of environmental issues. They strip what assets they have to survive until they get their next assets. But our program is looking at how can they keep their goat, how can they keep the trees from being cut down. So we engage them in public works programs, getting them to work to make them eligible for food distributions. In some areas we're doing cash distributions, so it's just kind of, it depends on the transfer modality, but mostly it's just food. So they work for a month. So now we started in May. They worked for 4 weeks, May through June, and just now, kind of this week, we're giving them food here, their first food transfer. So that will give them energy and keep them going for another month of work, so that they get their second food transfer, their third food transfer. By the time they get their third food transfer, they're harvesting their own gardens. Make sense? In theory, that's how it's supposed to work. But if you get a late start, if people don't work, it gets a little confusing. So the lean season is kind of the focus for our year. Quickly go through our program cycle, which I don't care much about, but you have to say it. So we started our year in, when was it? April. We had a 3-month break because we didn't get our money from our donor because they didn't have any money. So we lost a bunch of time. So we first had to go through our people again and say, are you still here? Did you move to another village? Did you leave? We had to make sure with all our people there. For my program, we have 4,430 households over 3 sub-counties. So like you have to find 4,000 people and say, are you still here? Do you want to work? Are you still in the program? Then we made some changes this year, so we had to tell them about the changes, sensitization, development buzzword, and then we formed them into working groups, maybe 30 or 40 people per group, so that they can be organized and have a leadership structure. And then using the NUSAF 2 framework, we had to do these sub-project selections, where we sit with the communities, we do a participatory role appraisal, we chat with them and say, what do you want to improve your life with? Here's our menu, kind of saying these are the things we can work with, and then they pick voluntarily, sort of. And then we have to get it approved through the government of Uganda, because it's a government program. So we work all the way through our government leadership, from local people all the way to the district leaders who sign and then approve the projects. And then we start buying stuff, distributing it, and then we get people working on public works, and then we monitor it throughout the program. So this is for a year. This is a year's program cycle, but we did this to here in about 6 weeks because we were 3 months behind schedule, and we were trying to get people working during the lean season. It was a nightmare, but it somehow managed to get done. So I talked about the menu of activities. There's 2 different categories of programs, public works and then household income. Public works for like access roads. It's basically just labor-based. Anything that people can work on that will positively benefit their community, we can do. So one example is river diversion. Because Karamoja's been kind of deforested, a lot of it looks like this, just open and flat. They cut down all the trees for firewood. So now when it rains, and it rains hard, it just runs off and creates these crazy rivers with lots of force. And so it sweeps away villages, it takes away people's gardens. So we have an engineer on our staff and we're working on diverting rivers to save villages. But that's just labor-based, getting people to dig channels to move the water. Anything to keep people busy so they can get their food transfer. Also looking at environmental issues of planting trees, reforestation, trying to rebuild the damage that they did. And then household income is looking at individual households. How can they improve their own livelihoods of their family? Maybe it's through vegetables or like their own gardens, fruit trees. So we bring seeds, we bring trainings. If they need some tools to do the work, we can bring tools. This is all they be doing onions in her garden. Okay, so that makes sense, the kind of program, what we're trying to do, the way we're doing it. Good. It's super hard. It's a really hard program. It's kind of a mess. So lots of challenges. You have to talk about challenges because that's what we do in development. So the program targets 77,000. I just have 4,000 of them. But everybody wants to be in the program because it's getting food and the history of food aid. Remember that as we're talking through all of this. So people want food, they want to be a part of a program that gives them food, but we can only feed so many people. It's a government program, so it gets a little complicated with egos and budgets and transparency issues. We lost 3 months this year because of delays with our program. WFP didn't get their money, so I didn't get my money, so we lost really valuable time. And food program is all about timing. If you're looking at agriculture, it's getting seeds at the right time, it's planting at the right time, weeding at the right time, harvesting and storing at the right time. It's very crucial. And so when you miss your times, you're missing opportunities to do well. Huge mindset problems. I don't want to stereotype and say that people are lazy, but they've had free food for 40 years. So they're reluctant to work. They're reluctant because they think, and they've done this in the past, if we sit and if things get bad enough, we'll just cry loud enough and they'll bring more food. If it doesn't rain, if we don't plant, then we don't have food, people will bring food. Our politicians will get involved, they'll get us food for us. So that mindset stuff is really hard to change. And we're just 2 years into the program of getting them to think differently. There's no real clear strategy of how we get people to think differently. It's just kind of showing and doing. But we need to look a bit more at, is it working? But it's showing them an alternative and seeing if they can follow down that road on their own. When I first got there in 2010, it was pretty insecure. Lots of things were going on that would keep people away from their gardens. It's kind of like in South Sudan now in the Nuba Mountains where people are starving to death because they can't plant because they'll get bombed by the north. Conflict ruins food production activities. They don't want to go to gardens because they'll get shot by warriors. So they just stay in and they don't plant. But now things are better, like we talked about. Our program is there's like 9 of us NGOs, and we all work on the same program in Karamoja. But the program doesn't really have a log frame or clear objectives. It's kind of WFP being WFP and not really having a clear idea of what they're doing. So that makes it a bit complicated when you say, what is our program trying to do? Well, we're keeping people busy, we're giving them food, we're planting stuff. That kind of summarizes the program. Last year we had good rain in some places. We had too much rain, we had not enough rain. So even just 20 minutes apart, one village has no rain, the other village is flooded because of too much rain. So it's really weird, irregular rainfall things. Coordination is getting to be a big issue because I talked about NGOs and aid communities are leaving northern Uganda and shifting into Karamoja. That's where the money is now. And so there's lots of programs doing the same things, lots of kind of competition for beneficiaries. So it's not very well coordinated. The men don't work. That's kind of an issue when you're doing labor-based technologies. It's all women working, and there's no real best way to solve that problem. You know women are overworked, but the men are just, I can say it, those guys are lazy. So how do we try to find ways to work on that issue? People are still a bit slow to become agriculture people. We did cash transfers last year, but it was a complicated system using cell phones and mobile money, and it was a nightmare, just a mess, because it wasn't thought through, and all of this is coming from our donor, not me. I didn't mess it up. But it was just a big system, how you give cash to hundreds and hundreds of people. So we would kind of have backpacks with $15,000, and you just sit under a tree, and people line up, and you just dole out cash. But it was just a mess. Same with food pipeline. We remember last year, East Africa, famine, lots of emaciated babies on TV. All the food in East Africa went to Somalia, Kenya, Ethiopia. So how do I do a food for work program when I don't have food? So there were instances where we would have them work 2-3 months, but we couldn't give them their food transfer in a timely way. So they're very stuck. Well, I'd be the same way. But if you work for a month with the promise that food will come, are you going to work your second month? If I get a salary every 2 weeks, if I don't get a salary after 2 months, am I going to keep working? Not really. But those are big global food issues. So it really hit us hard. But it's because they said, oh, we could get a better price and send it to Ethiopia, so we're not going to sell it to Uganda. So it was just, that was a mess too. Things don't look very good right now for 2012 because people didn't plant very much this year. They just got a late start. We got a late start. It seems like people just aren't producing as much food. So that could cause a problem where people are kind of saying, oh, we don't have very much food this year. You should come back and bring your relief food. We'll see. We'll see how it goes. But there's lots of things that we've done and lots of things that we're working towards. Looking at village savings and loan schemes, vegetables are a big one because they're easy, they're fast, they're good profit. So how can we build little economies within the villages and get them access to capital? Post-harvest handling is a big issue with, sometimes it's not always producing food, but it's kind of keeping it and storing it. In Uganda, it's like 40% losses just based on how they keep it. So we can spend a lot of time focusing on improving the handling of harvests. And then we just need to train people a lot more because they're not farmers yet. So they don't know the best techniques, the best ways to plant. We can work on capacity building on those things. Opening more land, water harvesting, because it's you get one rainy season, try to keep as much water in as we can. Improving market value chains. Lots of things we can be working towards. To wrap up and then go to discussions, there's lots of resources to learn more about this stuff if you're interested. Food security sector is huge. It's nutrition, it's food production, it's cash for work, it's relief food, it's a massive sector if you're interested in getting involved in it, and with tons of specific focuses within it. But FAO and WFP have a lot of good information about it. Assessment tools, trainings, early warning systems, All this is through their website. WFP makes a hunger map where you can see different regions that are affected and how well they're doing with nutrition. And then two more. One is TOPS, is Food Security Network. I went to a training 3 weeks ago in Ethiopia, and it was awesome. Super smart people, lots of cool new stuff going on. And they have like an online forum community where you can join, become a member of the Food Security Network. A lot of resources, best case scenarios, and things to continue learning from. And they have small grants if you're a partner of the network, if you're looking for money for stuff. And then USA does a great famine early warning system where you can see how countries are doing in terms of their food security. They look at a lot of different things and they just email you if you subscribe to them. Here's an example of one in Uganda. This is from August. And you can see the yellow on the right, that's all of Karamoja. And Moroto is my little town where I live. But then they kind of send these every month saying, okay, it should be raining okay, things are doing okay. They'll say it's the lean season, or we had a huge inflation last year, and so food prices went through the roof. And that was covered by the report saying this is what's happening. And that's it. So I flew through it, but that's kind of the highlights of what I'm doing, trying to do, and a quick window into the food security world. What was that, 25 minutes? So, questions?
Yes.
Comments? Please.
I think the work is a good work, but I have a couple of questions. The first one, when you do your production, who benefit from the production? Since you are paying these people to kind of work, so who benefit? Because I see you talking about food for public work.
Right.
So since it's for the public, does the government take the crops or how
Right.
do you?
Okay, so two different categories. You're a librarian?
Yeah, like
Yes. People are working on the public works, that's just the labor base. And then they get their food rations for them. But those are community-owned assets. Things like roads that connect schools, the water harvesting things, those are for the community. But then the household income, the gardens, that's only for the households. So I talked about work clusters, maybe 20, 30 people. We'll give seeds to those 30 people, but within that group, they all have their own gardens that they harvest. So it's all internal, they kind of keep it for themselves. They can work together in groups, but with the long history of conflict, groups don't really work very well there yet. There's a lot of animosity, and so we kind of have to let them sort it out themselves. I'd say, here's seeds, what do you want to do with it? Do you want to work together in groups on big gardens? Do you want small gardens? Whatever works best for certain communities, we kind of let them run with it. That makes sense. But the community's owning all this stuff. It's
The
not.
reason why I ask, I'm kind of more concerned about the continuance or the sustainability of those things, because I understand that because of the policy of the WFP, you guys do not have a systematic plan, objective plan to know what happens in the long run and things like that. So if you go to get a producer private just for the farmer, how do you ensure that the project is continuing or it will survive?
Sure.
In case your relief of food security or the food for work goes out, so you can be able to sustain themselves. Do you have any such thing in place? Or?
Right, and that's kind of the bigger picture of this project. It's a withdrawal strategy for WFP to get away from just giving food. So it's just 2 or 3 years of supporting food. It's called food assistance, and then it will eventually, hopefully, allow them to say, "We're done. We've given you the things you need, and we're out of here." Whether that happens or not, I'm not sure. There isn't a strong emphasis on sustainability, to be candid, though we know that's the best way to be doing things. One way we're looking at it is with kind of this post-harvest handling and seed banks, getting people to be storing seeds once they've harvested so that the following year there's no delays. They have everything they need. They can put it in the ground as soon as the rain starts. There's no sustainability in terms of kind of the public works part. They're not going to work if they don't get food. That's just the culture of how things are. But that's not quite an issue, really. because in the end, we'll have created roads and all the other public works. We'll see whether they maintain them or not.
How does this project help Samaritan versus Mission in kind of northern Uganda area? And then secondly, can you talk a little bit about your experience as an intern? I mean, as you know, all of us are now heading to become interns.
Sure.
And so the idea of you as an intern managing a project, how did that go for you? So
it's good. Yeah. Samaritan's first strategizes through, we kind of introduce ourselves into countries through emergencies. So in Uganda, we came in 2000s or something for refugees, and then we've kind of built our programs as we go. There's not quite clear countrywide strategy yet of what we're working on. Sometimes it feels like we just chase money, to be honest, but that's how NGOs survive. But we're building a strong food security sector. We're WFP's biggest partner in the country for food distributions and for some of these other projects. Does that answer how it fits our future strategy? So I was sitting in your chair and thinking I need a field semester. I don't want to volunteer because I used to do that and I'm done volunteering. So I said I need a job or a paid internship. So I knew about SB from a friend. I applied in like January and I interviewed. I was competing with a classmate, which was a bit awkward. And we interviewed right after each other. But I got it and she didn't. But it was a lot of it was just divine and God planning my steps. And SP was my step. So I went, SB's internship is really strong. I know a lot of people have applied for it this year because I've seen your applications. and they have strong ties with Eastern, and it's kind of like if you have a good meal at a restaurant, you keep going back. So they get good students from Eastern, so they keep going back. So I came as an intern. The way they do it is you spend maybe 8 weeks touring all of our country sites within Uganda. So you spend 2 weeks in this area of Uganda, another 2 weeks here, surveying all the programs. Because in Uganda we're doing HIV/AIDS, maternal child health. There's ministry programs which are more focused on discipleship, pastors training, evangelism. There's food security, food distributions, church mobilization, WASH, all kinds of sectors. So you kind of spend time in all those. When you're finished, you pick which program you want to work on. For me, it was a clear choice because they didn't have anyone to manage this program. Because it was only 2 or 3 month pilot program, they couldn't really commit to hiring a new person just for 3 months. So they let interns run it. It was great because then I was working on the proposal for the next year and I got myself a job to come back into. It was a very rare circumstance that I don't know many people have the opportunity with. But, so I finished in December, came home for Christmas, and I left in January to go back to work. Question answered?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, maybe just an elaboration on that then.
Yeah.
So can you talk then a little bit about kind of the stuff you learned here at Eastern? Did that play a role in what you were kind of doing with Samaritan's Purse? And were you able to pull a lot of stuff out of this and like place that into that? Did you have somebody mentoring you in Uganda when you were running this project, like come alongside you and say, well, this is kind of the direction we need to go and this is what we need to do? Like, if you can just talk a little bit more about that.
Sure. A lot of the things you'll learn in your first year or two are just learning it, that you won't learn in a classroom at Eastern. Things like running a budget, and you can read about leadership all you want, but then you have to fire people, and you have to hire them, and you have to discipline staff, and those are not things you can learn how to do well. So there are obviously gaps, you know that, but at least I learned how to write a proposal. That got me a job. Learned that from Eastern. Leadership stuff is important because I have 25 staff who I manage, and so I don't know how to do that. Just kind of figure it out as you go. But have the foundation from leadership class. Some of the other stuff I didn't really apply very much of. that's okay. But I think the credentials, just having the master's degree, gets your foot in the door of being respected. Everybody in the industry has one. If you don't, you're not really very serious. It's interesting because it's everyone that I know who manages projects in Karamoja are very smart, highly educated people, which you can count yourself as. So I hope anyways. Questions? Yeah.
How many of your 25 employees are local?
All of them.
All of them.
Our district governments actually have laws that make sure you have to hire local people. I think it's like 80% to 20%. So there are 2 of my staff who are from outside Karamoja, but who've come in to work on our project. But all of our field staff are local Karamojans. They speak the language, they live in the villages. We're kind of decentralized, so I work in my office, but all these guys live in their areas of operation, and so they live there, so that they can just quickly visit project sites. So they're all local Ugandans, which makes it interesting to manage, but good to kind of learn the best ways to interact with them and really get the full flavor of Uganda. Yes?
In your position as the administrator for the project you are running, with your background from Easton, especially when you were taught to do systematic planning in the project, saying that there are some structural things lacking, are you thinking about doing some comprehensive thing to kind of make your job much easier, maybe that will serve as a model for the organization to adapt after you should have leveled some of those after you? Is that something you're thinking about or what you do?
Can you just clarify or summarize?
You just explained that the WFP have no systematic structure.
Sure, okay.
When you measure your project,
Yeah.
your progress, and determine
Right.
the future of that. So
Right.
I said with your orientation from Easton being touched with project management, project planning, are you thinking of adapting or drafting something that will serve as a model for them to follow
Okay.
or adapt?
Yeah. M&E is not our strength yet, but we're improving on it dramatically. We've kind of missed our chance to do baseline surveys and understand what we started with, but we can still begin some M&E activities, focus groups or different things. We're looking at how we can start monitoring the program because we still have another year. It's 3 years, we're in our 2nd year. The problem is it keeps changing based on funding. So the first year, it's focusing on agriculture production, getting people working and opening as much land as possible. This next year they say, okay, we're all about resilience now. 3 months of public works to get people busy to work for food. The way it looks like it's shifting into maybe next year is climate change and becoming more environmental. And that's just because WFP can't find money for the program, because it's $25 million a year, and donors aren't so generous these days. And so you kind of have to change your programs to find the money, which is frustrating because every year it's different. So how do I know at the beginning of my 1st year and then at the end of my 3rd year that we've had a lot of positive impact if every year we're shifting it around? We're trying to improve M&E and we're trying to make things a bit better. But it's hard because you're not asked to do any of those things. You're not given resources to do those things. So you kind of just have to figure it out yourself internally, which we're trying to do. Please.
What do you do with people who are unable to work for food assistance since you moved from food aid to food assistance?
There's 2 categories of people. Well, 3. There's one group of extremely vulnerable individuals. Those are elderly, disabled, widowed, very, very old people, people who can't really survive on their own without food aid. Those people still get a monthly food ration of like beans and maize and oil and salt. So those people are, you talked about 2009, that general food distribution. Those people have just kind of stayed and they keep getting food relief. The second category is these moderately food insecure. Those are the ones who are working. And then your third category is kind of people who are okay. They don't need any kind of support. But those people who can't work get free food every month.
Our local, like local politicians, are they involved in the mindset of food aid also?
Mm.
Would you say that, or?
Involved in the mindset negatively?
Well, you know, depending on the food will be
Okay.
brought by the NGOs,
Yeah,
you know, to help the people, and so
Yeah.
they don't want to campaign for the people to be self-sufficient and,
Right.
you know, start farming on their own.
Right. I mentioned the history of 2009, we took over from the local governments. So there was a lot of hostility to the point where we even almost withdrew because it was too hostile of a place. Because they've lost their cash cow. We took the food from them, now they can't take it, they can't sell it, they can't feed their families. So there was a lot of hostility. It's changing. It's been several years now, so people are getting the idea. They're starting to see that it's inevitable. WFP can't keep feeding forever. So they are becoming a bit more positive. Uganda just created new districts conveniently right before last year's national elections. And so they split Karamoja into smaller districts. So now there are these younger new districts that are broken off from mother districts, and they're very energetic. They're usually the young people from the old administration who are a bit more positive and youthful. So we're working in these newer districts, and there's a lot more positive government support because they're eager to catch up with these other districts. They want to improve the lives of their people and have good relationships with NGOs and the aid community.
What were some of the things, like spiritually, church-based wise, that maybe you struggled with, or some steps you took to get involved in church, find a mentor, any of that stuff? How you kind of process that side?
Sure. I go to a small church. It's in Church of Uganda, so it's Anglican, which I don't connect with at all, but it's in English. It's the only English church in our town, and so I go to it more out of commitment to the church, I guess. I didn't go for a while, and I just kind of sat at home and read sermons and listened to a podcast, but it's very kind of spiritually dry. So I needed that community. So now I have a nice little church. I don't really like it, but I have to go to church. I need to go to church. So it's okay. It's interesting. It kind of personalizes things a bit more to where it feels like you're living overseas. Like you still do the same things you did when you were back here, just in a different context. But it's at 6:30 in the morning and it's brutal, but I do it. I work with a bunch of Christians, SP's Christian. So there's Christian community within our office, and we have devotions every day, and there's personal friendships that are kind of like mentorship, but more just personal stuff. Mother, you have a question?
I did. Regarding the agricultural program, when they're growing enough, can they produce enough to sell excess and have money to provide things for their family that they wouldn't otherwise? Are the plots big enough?
Right. Whether they should or shouldn't, they still do sell excess. Vegetables certainly, because vegetables are pretty abundant, and it's a great cash, quick money. Pull it off, take it to the market, sell it,
Right.
go buy a shirt for your kid,
Right.
something like that. It's not quite at the place where they can be exporting or marketing, but they try because they have to diversify. It's kind of like that's their only income source. So even if it's not enough, you still have to sell stuff to buy other stuff.
But it does improve their lives in other ways as well besides just food dependency.
Yeah. Another way, which is not official, but they'll sell the food aid that they get, where they get cash for some of the other stuff. So there were stories that they buy things for their kids because we give them cash.
Right.
And so, I mean, it happens whenever they sell food. Whatever. They need to buy stuff. It's their food. Yeah. I should highlight, these are my parents. It's great to have parents because you always have to ask them to take care of stuff in the States. And they let me sleep at their house when I come home. And it's great to have people back home to help you. So thanks for it. Other questions? We're almost out of time. Gregor?
Can you give contact information if people have further questions?
I can, yeah. But don't ask me for internships. A. Riddell at Samaritan. That's my work on. But I won't check it for 2 weeks because I'm on vacation. The other one would be my personal. But I'm happy to answer any questions because I know not very long ago I was in the same spot you are in. I'm by no means an expert with just 2 years of experience, but I know a few things. There's a new thing that we're looking at. It's some website that I look at. It's called Peer Coaching. It's connecting kind of aid workers and managers from around the world with other people, and it's just peer coaching of one-to-one. So then you get matched up with somebody. You can say, I'm having a hard time connecting with my staff over this issue, or I have a problem with my donor here. But it's just matching people around the world who are doing the same things. Google it, see if it would work for you. I'm looking to get into that, but it hasn't started yet.
And 2 questions. One is, are there churches among the Karamoja there, and kind of what is the spiritual situation in which they find themselves? And then second, I think you had mentioned that things have changed for the better. So maybe if you could just bring us back, what do you think in fact has changed for the better? Are the people happier now than they were before? And what do you think the outlook for the future is?
What was the last part? What do you think then?
The outlook of it for the future is, just in terms of that happiness factor.
Sure. Okay. What was the first part?
Churches?
Churches, thank you. Karamoja are animalists, so it's kind of very strange local religions. Human sacrifices to bring rains, a lot of weird stuff going on. Long history of Catholic missionaries, so you'll see a lot of Italian Catholics. So you'll see like people with Italian names, but they're Karamoja. But there's a long history of like Catholicism, a lot of missionaries and Catholic churches everywhere. So some people are nominally Catholic. There's a strong Pentecostal church within urban areas, towns, and they're pretty strong. And then there's the Anglican Church of Uganda. Predominantly, I mean, Uganda will say it's a Christian nation, but not really, kind of like America. But churches are more in the urban centers. The kind of your village, Manyana people are still very kind of animalist, traditional, local ancestry stuff, and need some Jesus. Second part?
The outlook for the
Outlook
future,
for the future.
happiness, things are improving.
Probably scatterbrain. Jet lag, I guess. Outlook for the future, hard to say. If the people can really understand that food's not coming anymore, they can embrace development programs, really participate and try to benefit from them, things will be okay. It's a lot safer and more secure. That goes without saying. Things are a lot better. The government's putting a lot of effort into the region, which is a positive step. So they're getting support for schools and roads, and electricity's coming soon. I've seen poles for a year, but now there's lines connecting them. We're getting a water system in our town. Like, there's good, big infrastructure development that's happening. And you need those things to connect, to bring in markets, and that's good. Positive outlook for that. It's just hard to say. If it doesn't rain, it's like you're going back to square one, because people don't know. They can't cope yet. They're not there yet. So it's kind of every year you kind of hope for the best. But there's lots of people there trying to help. Good progress so far. It's a frustrating place to work. So it's hard to be positive sometimes. And you have to fight with communities and they throw stones at you and chase you out. But mostly positive.
Can you comment a little on some of the living conditions people might be able to expect when they are not in first world country?
Well, most of you been overseas? head shakes.
Electricity?
I have a nice little house. I can't complain. I stay at a hotel, which is not much fun, but we have electricity and water. I do have a hot shower. It's not bad. It's basic. We're 13 hours from the capital city, but I get out every 2 months for R&Rs, so that's not bad. You just have a freezer and bring lots of meat and freeze it. I don't know. You've been overseas. Final question. I think we're almost done.
What do you think you would have done better if you were like native of the of that area?
If I was Karamoja,
Yeah, if you're Karamoja and then you go into to bring development there, what do you think you would have done better, knowing the culture, the language very well, and everything about that area?
We spend a lot of time now just interacting with communities and talking and sensitizing. I don't like that word sensitizing, but it's basically just community dialogues, and they're very smart. So that any time there's a problem, small problems become big problems. And so we have to be very proactive to always be communicating, passing messages, giving information. If there's a delay in the food, as soon as we find out, we have to be telling 4,000 people saying, we know you're eligible for food, but it's delayed. It's coming, it's coming, it's coming. Using local leaders, using church leaders, using local politicians, using ourselves to sit under a tree and just talk with them. Passing messages is always a huge part of our work. And then just getting people to understand where we're coming from so that they can relate. That's one thing we're working on. Cool. Thanks for having me.
Adam, thank you so much. Yeah,
Yeah.
appreciate it. As usual, when we have somebody who